accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Podcast of OA. This is Podcast of OA, episode number 123. I am your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and joining me this evening is our good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, Myron. Thanks for asking. Good to be here again. It always seems like these 2 weeks go by really, really fast, and I always look forward to them.
Yeah, me too. Here in the States, we just got done celebrating Independence Day. Did you do anything fun?
Well, I got to celebrate a lot before I went in for surgery on the 5th on my foot, but I got to have a good time on New Year's Eve. I got to see some fireworks and hang out with some friends. I had a nice time.
Me too. It was all about barbecue for me.
It usually is.
Yeah. I'm a kind of a barbecue nerd, so for me it's doing either ribs or pulled pork, or this year it was brisket. So it was I started at 4:00 in the morning to have it ready for dinner.
Now you're in New York. I'm in right in St. Louis. So what do you guys have for fireworks displays up there?
I live in the Finger Lakes area, so there's not a lot of big things going on, but we usually have a couple different firework displays. Some of them are the big fad here seems to be fireworks set to music. Yeah,
that's how everybody's doing it now. I did read that it was really interesting. I did read somewhere that some states are doing away with fireworks because they've had such an issue with them that they're now starting to do drones and light shows.
Yeah, I heard that. I thought it was kind of interesting.
They'll do anything these days, I'll tell you.
Well, in New York, for the longest time, fireworks, owning them and using them at home was illegal. So the last few years, it's become a big thing because it's been legalized again.
Yeah, that's how it is over here in Missouri.
But hey, talking about Green Lantern stuff, let's talk about what we got going on in this episode. So we've got some news and notes stuff to talk about, and you've got a really good topic about good starting and jumping on points for new readers. Plus, we're going to talk about Green Lanterns number 49, part 2 of the Rebel Run story, and we're going to talk about the latest chapter in the Darkstars saga in Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 47. Plus, we're going to do our first retro review, and we're going to talk about Emerald Dawn. Plus, we've got a listener comment. So we've got a packed show tonight.
And I do want to say that the closer we get to the end of GLC, I'm going to be upset.
yeah, I'm there with you. It's been such a rock-solid book. I hate to see it go. So hopefully it ends on a high note. But let's pause for a quick second, and then you've got an interesting topic to talk about good jumping on points for new readers. So let's take a quick pause, and we'll come back here momentarily and start talking about comics.
Fantastic. Hey guys, welcome back to the Podcast of OA. I'm Phil Bova. Nice to hear from you guys again. So Myron, the other night, I had some people over on Saturday night. We were sitting around, we had a fire going and some, stuff, or just hanging out, having a good time. And I got a couple of friends of mine, Ryan and Brian, that are avid comic book fans. And Brian primarily sticks to Marvel and stuff like that, but he has crossed the line over into DC from time and again. And my other friend Ryan, who's kind of a virgin, if you will, to Green Lantern, was talking about, what is the best issues to pick up if you wanted to first start reading about the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern Corps. Well, I didn't get the answer right away. My friend Brian, he chimed right in. He said, Phil led me on to reading Green Lantern Rebirth as a starting point, and he felt like it was a really, really, really solid issue by Jeff Johns, and it really, really introduced the character in a way that he said he didn't really need to go back much further to understand the characterization of Hal Jordan from that point moving forward. And of course, my friend Ryan was writing down notes because he wants to start reading this kind of material. And I got to thinking, I did agree with it, and I did agree that Green Lantern Rebirth would be a great, great launching point. But I kind of want other people's views on where they think is the best launch point to start a Green Lantern reading session. And if I'm looking back to a lot of times when I started, because I mean, as comic book readers, I don't know if you've done this before in the past, but there's been times when I have quit for a little while and then went back to it. And there was a moment in my life when I quit for, it was a good year or two. And I had read Green Lantern Rebirth, and I think that came out in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. But then I had stopped for a while, and then to reacclimate myself with the character, I had actually started reading the whole Blackest Night run. Then I went back and then I redid a Green Lantern Rebirth. I did a reread on it, and I was kind of cross. I didn't know really what to tell people on where they thought they should start out with. Do you have any ideas or do you have any opinions on that?
Jeff Johns said something really interesting one time. He said, anytime you pick up a book and start reading, that's the beginning of your continuity with the character. And he likened it to real life. For example, you and I have both lived fairly long lives already, yet we're still relatively new to each other. So our personal continuity starts fairly recently. And I don't need to know your entire life story to be able to relate to you and interact with you. And he said, the same thing is true with comics. Wherever you start will work for you. And I agree with that to a point, but I like you. I like the idea of recommending something like Green Lantern Rebirth or Secret Origin. And I've often pointed people to Jeff Johns' Secret Origin arc just because it gives you the origin part of Hal Jordan's story, and it gives you little pieces like the introduction of Atrocitus that helps them if they then go back to Rebirth and start reading. They at least know some of the character's history, and when they start to see some of these things develop, they'll see the beginning kernels of them. But starting at Rebirth also makes a lot of sense. Starting with the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps Rebirth makes a lot of sense because it's a good jumping on point. A lot of it depends on how interested that person might be in going forward. But I like to point them to Secret Origin, at least personally. Now, before that, I would have pointed them to the book we're going to talk about tonight, Emerald Dawn, because
right.
that was the origin prior to Secret Origin.
Right. And I hadn't considered Secret Origin. That's a good thought. I didn't really consider that one. I haven't read that one in a while myself. And what I did notice though, when we started talking about, Hal Jordan and his back history or whatnot, Rebirth obviously picks up after he's done being Parallax, after he's done, more or less losing his head, right, losing his mind and going after the Guardians, going after the Corps, after he's done being the Spectre, and he's gone for a while. And that's where Rebirth picked up, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right?
Right. Hal went from being Parallax to dying in the final night, and then he came back as Spectre in Day of Judgment, also written by Jeff Johns. And then he was the Spectre in a solo series for a while, and then that ended, and he did some guest appearances, but then it led right into Rebirth.
Right, okay. So, but I didn't think about Secret Origins. That's actually a good one, man. You know what? I need to reread that one myself. It's been a while since I've tapped into that particular issue too.
Well, it was interesting because Jeff Johns didn't start with Secret Origin. That came later, and that was after we'd already been exposed to Atrocitus. And then he put Atrocitus in the Secret Origin story. It felt more natural. It wasn't a surprise to see Atrocitus there because we knew who Atrocitus was. But you could hand that to somebody who's a brand new reader. They would get the origin tale and still get the jumping on point, and that wouldn't be spoiled for them.
That's a good point. That's a really, really good point. I'm going to have to text him and lead him on to that one too. But it was really, really interesting. They always try to get me to read Marvel, and the thing, I don't know how you are with the comic book industry, but I've been reading comic books pretty much since the early 80s. So I'm 44 now, and I've devoted so much of my time, so much of my energy, so much of my life into reading about DC characters since that time that I've really never developed a full grasp and a deep knowledge and understanding of reading the characters of Marvel. Fast forward to where we are now, and this is kind of what I was telling my wife about. She was asking the same thing. And I was telling her, I was like, a lot of these movies that are coming out, you start with Iron Man and all the other ones that have come out from Marvel Entertainment, a lot of that was a supplement towards understanding the characters that I didn't really want to read the comic books to get into them any further because I felt like the movies supplied what I needed to get out of that particular element, right? So, whereas over at DC, I feel like I want to read more about the characters and gain the understanding, because I honestly don't feel like some of these movies are really giving good in-depth characterization to some of the main people. Wonder Woman was, there was an exception to the rule because it was such a great movie, and they really expounded on her character a lot. But some of the other movies, I don't feel like they're really delving really well into their personal lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think sometimes they don't necessarily get into the motivations of the characters. I have sometimes pointed people towards Green Lantern First Flight as an introduction to the character, even though it's not the true origin comic book related wise to what readers would get. They would get the gist of who Hal is, how he gets the ring, and that dynamic with Sinestro that would help them make that leap right to the comic books.
That's true. That is very true. What about the Green Lantern animated series? I mean, I wonder if that would be a good one for somebody to pick up on.
I always highly recommend the Green Lantern animated series to anybody who will listen to me.
That was just a fantastic animated series.
It was. I didn't really dip into the origin. In fact, there was a joke early on about how Hal gets the ring, and they didn't recount that whole story. But, I got to tell you something maybe you might find humorous about the whole Marvel and DC thing. So
okay.
I'm 53 years old, and I started reading comics very, very young. I was very sickly as a kid, and so I had to, I read a lot. And my parents were pretty financially, well, not well off, but we were pretty poor as a family. So my mom used to find at the stores, at the convenience stores, bags of comics without their covers, and you would get a bunch of them for, like $1, and you'd get maybe 6 or 7, 8 of them. So she would buy me comic books that way. And without the cover and without the logo on the front, if you really weren't paying attention, you didn't really, I never, at least as a kid, didn't know there was a difference between Marvel and DC.
That is really interesting.
I always wondered why the Avengers and the Justice League didn't team up. I wondered why Spider-Man and Superman didn't get together. For me, I was very brand blind until I got old enough to start buying my own books and started to see the logos and so on. But I started reading, probably 6, 7 years old. I struggled with a lot of the words, but I started reading very, very young. And again, I really didn't know the difference. I would see the Marvel stuff, but I didn't realize there were different companies. I didn't. Who reads the fine print at the bottom of the book? Especially when you're that age.
Especially that age, right? Yeah.
Right. So I grew up not knowing that too much until I got a little older and started to buy new comics for myself. So when I would do, I would do chores and mow people's lawns and whatever to get money for comics. And my cousins and I would go to a convenience store and we'd each buy some comics, and then we'd go back to their pool house and we'd read comics and swap them. That was just what you did back then.
That's really that's fun, man. It's kind of like that Coke Pepsi thing when they used to put the sleeves over them. And I remember back when they had that whole thing going on, that whole dispute going on between which was better, Coke or Pepsi. And a lot of times they would put the sleeves over them, and they do the taste test in the malls when I would be walking around, and you're supposed to tell which one was the better soda, And a lot of times these arguments that people get into when it revolves around DC and Marvel, I always say, well, do you remember Coke, Pepsi? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, it's all about what you like. I mean, if you like Coke, you like Coke. If you like Pepsi, you like Pepsi. It's all about what you want to delve yourself into and what you want to invest your time and energy into. And a lot of times I think that's missed with people because they get so drawn out into these, who's better, I mean, who does this and who does that? And we even bled into that conversation we had Saturday night. We even led into the Amalgam comics that came out, where they were the Dark Claw and the Super Soldier and Iron Lantern and stuff. And this other guy, Ryan, hadn't even heard of him before, I don't think. And he was like, wow, that's really interesting that they decided to do that back in the 80s, I think that was.
Yeah. For me as a kid, because I didn't really know the difference, I was invested in both universes, and as a kid, it was easy to do that. As an adult who has a lot less free time, I do find it difficult to kind of keep abreast of what's going on in two different sense of universe continuities, if you will. So, Yeah, so I pretty much have stuck with DC for the longest time just because of Green Lantern. I'm like, if I've got to choose a home, if I got to choose a universe, I'm going to choose the one that Green Lantern is in because that's my main character.
Right. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So that's kind of what I led him on to, and I think maybe we gained another reader and another listener.
That's great. Well, let's throw this out to the listening audience. Share with us what your ideas are for where you'd recommend jumping in point, because we'd love to hear your perspective.
I'd be interesting to see what that poll would represent. I'm willing to guess a lot of readers would probably default back to Rebirth, but like when we decided to do the retro stuff coming, but we're going to go in later on in the episode, and I was rereading Emerald Dawn myself. I got to rethinking, this isn't a bad jumping off point too, because that came out, 1989, 90. So that's a good 15 years of character building that somebody could develop before they even go into Rebirth. Plus, they're missing out on the whole Parallax dynamic. They're missing out on the Spectre dynamic. They're missing out on a lot of what builds Hal Jordan into the character that he is today and helps understand how he acts the way that he does.
But I think, too, that's what sometimes drives readers like ourselves who've been reading for a longer period of time. When you see somebody write the character out of character, it really sticks you in the craw because you've got this long history with the character and you think you really understand them. And along comes a writer who undercuts what the core of the character's beliefs are.
Right. That's a very, very good point.
All right.
We'll see. And when we get the poll up or whatever you do, we'll have to talk about that the next episode and see what people think.
Absolutely. So we've got a few little news tidbits. So let's take a quick pause, get a sip of soda or whatever, and we'll be right back.
Absolutely.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa. So, Phil, the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple of interesting tidbits that have come out. Are you looking at or reading the DC Nation magazine that comes out at the comic shops every month for free?
I am, and let me just say, I love that DC decided to do that. I used to read the previews all the time. I used to pick those big old books up and stuff, and a lot of times it included a lot of information in there that I just either didn't want to know or didn't care to know, and sometimes it was helpful, but I like how they're minimizing it because Marvel does their own individual one, and I'm glad DC decided to do theirs.
Yeah, I really like it. I think it's kind of neat that they are giving you kind of a glimpse behind the scenes. There's a little things like, how to design a cover and what decisions do they make when they pick different cover designs or, what goes into designing a page. There's some of those things that are kind of lifting the hood up. But in this second issue that came out, there were a couple of Green Lantern things in here. And one was they were talking about issue 3, which comes out on August 1st, and talking about there was going to be a story about DC's mystery Green Lantern announcement. So, I'm pretty sure I know what it is. We've mentioned it before. A creator at DC confirmed to me that Grant Morrison's doing something with Green Lantern. If that's what it is, that'll be great. I kind of think we're going to hear about it before this DC Nation book comes out. I don't think they would announce it that way. I think we're going to find out about it at San Diego Comic-Con in a couple weeks.
I hope so. I don't want to. I hope so. If they got something big in store, I just wish they'd be up front and start just telling everybody. Just be transparent. And the thing about DC and what I've noticed is they're really tapping into their writers and their artists, and they really seem like they're trying to get on board all these new ideas and new inventions with characterization and new inventions with new writers on board or whatnot. Conversely, and we'll go back to what we were talking about a little while ago with Marvel just seems to be having a lot of issues when it comes to their writers and their publishing. But like I said, DC just seems like they're just taking a stand, and it looks like they're really up in the ante when it comes to all their books that they're starting to produce.
Yeah, agreed. Now, the real interesting thing was the second little bit of news in there was Tom King, who a lot of people know from the Batman books. He wrote Omega Men, and he wrote, I think personally for me, the best Green Lantern issue of the last several years. That whole from the Darkseid War story where Hal gets the power of light and becomes the god of light. That whole issue. He's doing a series in September that starts in September called Heroes in Crisis. And Tom King was in the CIA. He was over in the Middle East for a period of time. And so he tends to write a lot of these stories that are very grounded in that kind of reality. And so what he's doing, it's a very interesting premise in which, look at some of the things that our superhero community heroes go through. And some of them have got to have PTSD. Some of them have to be going through some issues and dealing with what they deal with. So he's kind of taking that and writing a murder mystery wrapped under the guise of this whole story about post-traumatic stress disorder and superheroes. And so in this book, in this DC Nation book, they have a picture of a bunch of characters, and they basically say, well, in this story, one of these people that's on this page, one of the three of them is going to be accused of murder. Can you guess which one? One of them is going to, three of them are going to be accused of murder. And then one person's going to be the murderer, and two characters are going to die that are on this page. Can you guess which ones are which? And on the page is Constantine, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, Nightwing, Red Robin, Booster Gold, Deathstroke, Green Arrow, Arsenal, Poison Ivy, Superman, Lex Luthor, Mr. Terrific, the Atom, the original version of the Atom, Beast Boy, Harley Quinn, Damage, Wally West, Catwoman, and Kyle Rayner. So that makes people wonder, well, geez, is Kyle going to be up for grabs in terms of potentially being killed off? And I think some of that stems from back in the day when Rebirth came around, when Jeff Johns did his story. I remember Ethan Van Sciver saying, well, they were told by DC editorial that they could kill Kyle off if they wanted to, if it made the story stronger, that they didn't care one way or the other. So people are thinking, well, they must be considering Kyle disposable. That's certainly one potential when you look at this list of characters, which ones are ones that they would be willing to kill off. If you look at some of these characters like Catwoman, she just got a new series. You look at...
Damage, too. Damage is... he just started writing... what's-his-face? Venditti started writing Damage. I can't see if they kill him off that quick.
Right, and certainly it's not going to be Wonder Woman or Superman or Lex Luthor. You're not going to kill those kind of characters off. Right.
Over in the Terrifics.
And the other thing was that came out in the solicitations was that Harley Quinn and Booster Gold are two of the people being accused of murder. So that solves part of that riddle already. The other interesting thing, and what I kind of thought back on, I met Tom King 2 or 3 years ago at the Baltimore Comic-Con, and I was fortunate enough to interview him, and this was during that time period. I don't remember if you remember, Phil, but Omega Men was supposed to run 12 issues, and it got canceled because it really didn't sell well. And then there was a lot of fan demand, so Jim Lee said, no, despite the low sales, we're going to continue to print this through its conclusion. And when I was talking with Tom King, it was just after Jim Lee had said, hey, we're going to stand behind the Omega Men book because we understand there are a lot of people that are passionate about it. And so I was interviewing Tom King at the time, and he was talking about the power of this Omega Men story was that he was kind of building a bomb. And when that bomb goes off, it's going to have a lot of impact on the DC universe and the Green Lantern universe in particular. And I was thinking about that after seeing this thing in DC Nation. I thought, what if Kyle, when he was with the Omega Men, what if he was, I don't want to say brainwashed, but what if he was programmed?
Well, if you look back you go back further with Kyle, he was also subjected to his girlfriend being, shoved into that refrigerator, the big issue that caused all that controversy way back when. Right. So, it would stem from a lot of issues that he has as far as his personal character goes, but do you think losing Kyle Rayner, and I know I'm going to tread on a lot of fans, and I like Kyle Rayner, I like his character, but do you think losing Kyle Rayner is going to be a big impact to the Green Lantern Corps? To be probably shouldn't have said that so nice.
to be brutally honest, I'm not sure. I think the problem we have in the Green Lantern universe right now is we have too many main characters, too many Earth Lanterns, and not enough books to spread them around and to do justice to those characters. And losing one or two, would that be the worst thing for the franchise? I don't think so. Would it be a bad thing for the fans of those characters? Certainly it would. As a lifelong Hal Jordan fan, I certainly know what that feels like. And to see Kyle Rayner potentially be a murderer, I lean towards, I think there's more potential for Kyle Rayner to be the murderer than for him to be a victim.
That would be cool. And it'd be really cool if they wrote him in to where he went to another Lantern Corps. Of course, he's held every ring there is anyway, but it would be neat to see him change allegiances to another Corps, Even if he moved over to the Sinestro Corps. He would make a pretty cool leader of the yellow light, It'd be kind of neat.
Well, he could reunite with Sornak Natu that way, that's for sure.
And they've always had that dynamic going back and forth, and they've had a lot of tensions in the past issues that he's been in.
I kind of, I liken this to, as much as I loathe Emerald Twilight and what it did to the franchise and how it villainized Hal, as much as I absolutely hate that, without Emerald Twilight, you wouldn't have Green Lantern Rebirth and everything that came after it. And
Absolutely.
I think sometimes, much like the death of Superman and much like Emerald Twilight, fans don't always appreciate a character until they no longer have that character. And perhaps that's the best thing for Kyle, is to have something traumatic happen to him and give him a road back so that people can reappreciate the character. There was a big controversy a few years ago when I think it was Joshua Fielkoff, I think it was his name. I may have just completely slaughtered his name. But he was supposed to write a story supposedly where Jon Stewart was killed. And there was fan uproar, and he walked away from DC and said he wasn't going to write the book. And honestly, I kind of think it might not have been a bad thing for the Jon Stewart character, because in comics at least, he has not gotten the kind of treatment that the character warrants. I think he was certainly treated well by the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited cartoons, but I think in the terms of comics, he wasn't getting the amount of attention in the spotlight maybe he deserved. And by taking him off the table, would that create interest in the character that doesn't seem to be there?
I mean, that would be one point. I mean, killing off Kyle Rayner, though, that would just be really interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm all in. I'm all for it. I like what they're doing with this Hero in Crisis thing. And since you brought that up, I went to I did some research on it. I was looking up some stuff, and on Newsrama's website, they had a Heroes in Crisis, a Sanctuary fact sheet, which is credited to Tom King. So how it reads is, and they have it printed in full here, and how it reads is, number one, Sanctuary is a safe place for superheroes to explore the trauma of their violent lives and deal with the other effects of the fight. They come, they rest, they confess, and they move on, which would fit the mold of Kyle Rayner, right? I mean, he had a lot of trauma going through the Omega Men, being, they faked his death or whatever they did in there, right?
Right. And he spent some time with the Omega Men and kind of did some questionable things. And you brought up a good point with his girlfriend being shoved in the refrigerator. And let's not also forget his mother being killed by Despalitus in the Sinestro Corps War.
Right. I forgot about that. That's a good point. Okay, so number 2 says Sanctuary was built 5 years ago when the big three, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, realized that emerging superheroes would sometimes need help dealing with the worst parts of the job. Number 3 says that to the outside world, Sanctuary appears to be a small, isolated ranch in rural Nebraska, but under the illusion, the ranch is, in reality, a sophisticated, futuristic compound based on Kryptonian technology. It is manned solely by robots and holograms. The only real people at Sanctuary are the heroes. It provides the therapy the heroes of the DC Universe needs. The typical stay ranges from a few days to a few weeks, and on rare occasions, even longer. It's a secret. General public doesn't know, obviously. To protect the privacy of the heroes, the Trinity discourages them from talking about Sanctuary, though it is an open secret that many heroes have visited. Only 3 people know, Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman. No records of the visits are kept, which is kind of sketchy, especially if you're a hero. Batman sees Sanctuary as a necessity, Wonder Woman sees it as kindness, and Superman sees it as good. And now everyone who's at Sanctuary is dead. And this leads into the Heroes in Crisis. So now, going back with all your history that you've read with DC Comics, have you ever come across a Sanctuary before, or is this a new concept?
I think it's pretty much a new concept. I don't recall anything like this before, and I think it's a very interesting concept for Tom King to explore. And given his personal real life history, I think it's certainly appropriate for him to write this kind of a story and wrap it under the umbrella of a murder mystery. It reminds me a little bit of Identity Crisis. I think obviously there's some parallels there.
It does, and it really delves into like the personal aspects of these characters, I mean, because we all know, we read these guys day in and day out in our weekly polls or whatnot, but yet going back, and since this has been released that they're going to do this concept, it's like you go back and you sit there and go, why didn't I think of this sooner? I'm sure a lot of these heroes have a lot of pent up anxiety, or suffering from extreme PTSD. So where was this place a long time ago?
Right, or anger over the loss of a loved one at the hands of an enemy.
Right. It seemed like Arkham Asylum was the default crazy asylum to go to, where everybody gets sent to.
Well, isn't it very much symbolic of the way our real world is, where we spend a lot of money on prisons, but not a lot of money on mental health?
Yeah, that's right. Conversely, that makes a lot of sense, and a lot of parallels that exist with a lot of these comic books exist in real life. I mean, we've seen that. I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it over the course of the years, reading day in and day out a lot of these books, and a lot of them reflect a lot of the anxieties that society deals with. And this is a really, really good one to tap into.
Yeah, I think heroes are the type of characters that quite frequently they keep plugging forward, but they don't take time out for their own well-being. So it's not, this seems like a not only very timely story, but a very realistic way to portray the superhero community as human beings and not just the idolized characters that we see.
Sure. I like it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So, we've got some time between now and when that first issue comes out. So I'd love to hear what our listeners might think. Do they think that Kyle is on the chopping block? Do they think Kyle might be a murderer? Or do they think that Kyle's going to get off scot-free and nothing bad is going to happen to him? I'd love to hear what other people's ideas are.
Well, I will say this. I'll miss Kyle if they get rid of him. But I will also say that you've read books. Characters come and go, I mean, Hal Jordan was gone for a long period of time, a stretch. Wally West has been gone, and the fan base went absolutely ballistic over that. Mm-hmm. And I don't even know how long they rallied to try to get him back, and now he's back, Well,
think about how long Barry Allen was gone.
Exactly. I mean, characters come and go, and you made a point by saying, when they're gone, we miss them, and it's only the point of when they're gone that is when we do miss them. I mean, maybe Kyle's just up for that, I don't know, to take him out of the equation altogether and then readdress his character later on.
Right. I remember back in the days of the death of Superman, we kind of all knew that Superman was going to come back, but what this was the writers saying, people don't care about Superman the way they should, so let's show them what the world would be like without Superman. And they killed Superman off with with every intent to bring him back, but they wanted people to see the ramifications of the loss of of a character like Superman. What kind of a hole does that leave behind?
Yeah, and it really did. Boy, that was a fun time back then, reading the death of Superman. But they didn't have a lot of the spoilers and stuff that everybody has now, especially with social media. That just people just get ground down into theories on this and theories on that and this and that. Back when that issue came out, I mean, it hit the news. Superman's dead. It was a national thing. People freaked out, and then it was like you didn't hear much about it. Week by week would go by, and then you'd have the reign of the Superman and stuff like that, and you're like, well, I wonder when he's coming back. There was no illusion of when he was coming back. You didn't know when he was coming because we didn't have that connect that we have with today's world, with the writers, the artists, and the fan base.
Agreed. The internet wasn't really a thing back then at all, and so you didn't have a lot to help fuel people other than maybe some comic magazines that used to be around back in the day. But
well, we'll see what happens.
Let's take a quick break and let's start talking some comics. What do you think, Phil?
That sounds great to me, man.
All right. Hey, guys, we'll be right back.
Hey, guys, come check out Two Dimension Comics, the comic book podcast with no direction.
We feature candid roundtable discussions about all things comics, past and present, with a killer soundtrack.
We like to include visuals of everything we talk about on the show. You can find that by going to bunchofdorks.com and click on the Cyclops!
All right, we're back, and thanks for coming back to another episode of the podcast of OA. Phil and I are going to talk about Green Lanterns number 49, and this is part 2 of Aaron Gillespie's Rebel Run story arc. So, Phil, I'm going to ask you what you think. I've got some strong opinions about this particular issue, but I'd like to hear what you've got to say about it.
Well, it's going to go back to what we talked about with Rebel Run Part 1. It's just an extension of another. It just wasn't a good book. I mean, it picked up with the last one you kind of led to believe that Simon Baz was there to take control of the situation. He was going to run her in or whatnot. But then this one opens up with Simon Baz catching up to her, and then he's trying to talk her down, and then basically you can trust me. I'm here to help you. Outside of that, again, this issue strayed away from the whole characterization of Jessica Cruz. You know, we've kind of lost some of that build up with her anxiety, that build up with her personal issues that she was having with the Green Lantern Corps, or having the ring itself. And again, this one did the same thing. I mean, it just basically talked about her being on the run, but it didn't really give us much more in-depth view of either Simon Baz or herself.
Yeah, I agree. I think they made Jessica look way too headstrong and having way more experience than she actually does. And, you know, having her go toe-to-toe in a physical altercation with highly trained bodyguards and kind of, you know, holding her own against them, I was kind of left rolling my eyes. And then when we got to the end and she gets in Hal's face and uses the word woke, I was ready to throw the book away.
That was interesting. That was their dynamic is really it's kind of curious to see Hal Jordan and Jessica Cruz. I would have thought that them two would have been would have been a good kind of like a team up kind of characters. You know, like I would have thought Jessica would have been better to learn under Hal Jordan and his tutelage than she would have learning alongside Simon Baz, because Simon Baz is just as new at this as she is. Well, by a little bit.
Well, and when you take into consideration in Darkside War how Hal was the one that was teaching her how to try to use Volthoom's ring for good, that dynamic was already established for those two characters.
Right, and I'm kind of surprised that they decided to just say, let's just go ahead and put her and Simon Baz together, which if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to go back to issue number 1 when this first started. And while I do like them as a pairing, I don't think that they have a good personal dynamic together. I never picked up on any threads that led me to believe that those two were so close to where they had to count, that they could and they wanted to count on each other when it got down to it. Sure, at extreme moments, they really stepped up to the plate with each other, but as far as personally, I just don't think they ever really meshed very well.
No, and one of the things that really bothered me was seeing how he made Hal the heavy just to elevate Jessica's character. You know, if you look at what's going on in the Darkstars story arc, you see Hal struggling to accept Tomar 2 as someone who's gone too far and is not redeemable. Yet you see him here slapping the cuffs on them right away. It's such a departure for that character. He has a long relationship, as we just talked about. He has a relationship with Jessica and helping her deal with the whole ring, and he's got experience with Simon Baz during the period of time he's been there. He wouldn't be the one to jump to a conclusion that the two of them are instantly guilty, especially given his own history. And to me,
you can say it's pot calling the kettle black a little bit. Right.
And it seems like Aaron Gillespie is like, okay, I need to make Hal look like the heavy to elevate Simon and Jessica and give Jessica a reason to blow up at him. And I'm like, that's really lazy writing in my book.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe Gillespie doesn't have a lot of background history with some of these characters. Right. I mean, he's a new writer. I mean, I don't know how we talked about him last time on the last podcast we had, and I know he's fairly new by a year or two, but it just, to me, and no knock to him, and I know he's going to do well moving forward. Like you said, it just seemed like it was amateur writing.
I kind of wonder if behind the scenes, I don't think Tim Seeley was scheduled to leave the book quite so quickly. I kind of wonder if this was like, okay, quick, we need a story. Aaron Gillespie, you're toss the ball, give us something, but you've got a real short time frame. Because when you look at the art in this issue, the art looked very rushed. At least to me, it did.
Right, and then of course, if you want to extend that, if you look at issue 50, Dan Jurgens jumps right on.
Right.
And Gillespie just did 2 issues basically, and then along comes Dan Jurgens and takes over the helm.
Yeah, I almost feel like this was a case of DC editorial saying, okay, we're going to yank Tim Seeley off because we know Jurgens is coming in. Let's find a writer to fill in 2 issues and not give him a whole lot of time. It reminds me, I mentioned Emerald Twilight a little bit earlier. It reminds me a little bit of the Emerald Twilight situation where, they originally had a story for Emerald Twilight and they canned it, hired Ron Mars, gave him a rough outline and said, okay, you've got a weekend to write this book. It was that kind of a feeling I've got when I read this, because there were a lot of hastily made decisions that were not well thought out, both in terms of dialogue and characterization.
Right. That's a good point. Well, I don't know. Like I said, it didn't. I was disappointed. I mean, I liked Seeley. I have liked the book because I'm a big fan of Jessica Cruz, and I really want to see what they're going to do with her character in the future. And I've always been a big proponent of hers when they first teased her in Forever Evil. And I always alluded to the fact that someday they're going to do something really, really big with her character. And they have. She's held strong. She's held her own in the core. I mean, she's held her own in the core more than some of the other core members have. I'm gonna be glad that she's going over to Justice League Odyssey because it's really gonna be interesting how she interacts with a lot of those other big name players like Cyborg or whatnot.
Well, I think the interesting thing is you don't hear anything about Simon Baz in that book. So what's happening with Simon? You know, I still think we're going to see the Green Lanterns book get canceled when Morrison comes on. I still think that's what's going to happen. And I think you're going to see John is going to live in Justice League. Jessica is going to live on in Justice League Odyssey until Morrison is done doing whatever it is he's going to do. And Kyle and Simon and Guy, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Now, if Kyle becomes a victim in that whole story, then that deals with what's going on with him. But Simon Baz and Guy Gardner, I really don't know what to expect.
Yeah, me neither. And they're not giving us anything, you know.
No. And that's part of the I think it's part of the frustration as a Lantern fan is seeing the Green Lantern universe be at such high points and now shrink down to a single book. And you know, you and I are not talking about Green Lanterns right away once Jurgens takes over because they've made the decision to jump ahead in the timeline to after the end of Robert Venditti's run, and neither one of us want to be in a position of reading about something that we see the results of Robert Venditti's final arc reflected on. I don't want that spoiled for me. I'm sure you and I are both in the same boat here. We don't want the ending of that run to be spoiled by something we might read about in Green Lanterns.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's sitting here right in front of me on my iPad, and I got it all queued up and ready to go. And it takes a lot because I really do want to read it because I'm really, really curious. But again, going into what you had said, I mean, I feel like, and as you do, we're doing Venditti a disservice by not finishing out what he has really, really put a lot of effort into, and then ending it on something that's going to give us spoilers. Because if I read this, chances are I probably won't read the last of Venditti's arc, you know, because I've already known what happened. So I'm just going to wait it out. Listeners, I would advise doing the same. I guarantee you, if you hold on to this issue 50 of Green Lanterns, and wait and read that after Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps are done, you'll do it. It'll be a better benefit to you as a reader.
I agree. You know, I struggle sometimes because of the blog. There's an expectation that I'm going to review a book as soon as it comes out, but I'm also a fan and a reader, and I don't want my reading experience spoiled by, to me, at least in my opinion, is a poorly decided decision by the editorial to release 3 issues of a book that takes place after another book.
Right.
You know, I can hold on to those 3 issues, and after I get done reading Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 50, I can now read 51, 51, and 52 and be caught up.
And I did also hear that Tyler Kirkham is doing the cover art for the remaining issues of that run. And he stated I think he tweeted me the other day that they're going to be connecting covers.
That's cool.
The last 2, I think.
That's very cool.
Don't know what it is. He hasn't given me any teasers, but I'm looking forward to it because I've been buying all of his variant covers.
Yeah. You know, rather than we usually take a pause in between comic reviews, but let's jump right into Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps number 47 since we're talking about it and talking about Tyler Kirkham's cover, because that cover of Hal with the power battery on his shoulders to me is so symbolic of the weight that Hal feels. It's a very Atlas-inspired cover. I love it.
Yeah, I went out and bought that right away. Well, of course, I already told the guy, I go to this comic book headquarters, which is right down the road here in St. Louis, and you can look them up. They're on Instagram or whatnot, and great group of guys. I can go in there, and it's funny because I'll call them up, and I'm like, hey, you know, this is Phil, and I was wondering if you guys can hold that. Right before I finish the sentence, he goes, you want us to hold that Tyler Kirkham variant, don't you? And I'll start laughing. I'll be like, yeah. Like, don't worry, man. We already got it set aside for you. You're pretty much the only one I know who's going to call and request it, so we got it on hold.
That's great.
And I'm like, how could no other Green Lantern fans love the art that this guy has been doing for these last covers? They have been phenomenal.
Yeah, he's done a great job.
He's killing it, man. He's just killing it. I met him way back here in St. Louis was a Project Comic-Con that came through, and it was pretty much a year before St. Louis started getting the regular Comic-Con St. Louis, and I met him there. I got my picture taken with him or whatnot, and I'll be honest with you, he was the only person that I wanted to meet when I went to that Project Comic-Con. Everything else that was there was kind of just, boring to me or whatnot, but he was the only guy I wanted to go there to meet. Sadly, I haven't seen him since then. That's been a long, long time.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't been fortunate enough to meet him yet. He's one of the people that's on my list that I want to meet, but he hasn't been in a show that I could get to.
He's so busy. He does art for a lot of stuff, and it's like, man, they're working his tail off.
Oh yeah. So this issue, I think this issue had so much heart in it. You find out that Hector Hammond was essentially testing Hal for Hal to prove to himself that whatever baggage he was carrying, he can dispose of. That in the end, even when he didn't know who he was, his moral compass was still strong enough to realize that what Hector Hammond wanted to do was wrong.
Well, and it feels like he's like taking some of the burden off of Hal Jordan too. He wants Hal Jordan to be able to see without any kind of interference. I guess that's kind of like what I got from them two talking to one another.
I think that's a good way to phrase it, without any interference, to give Hal that clarity of purpose and the clarity of vision about himself.
And because if you think about it, this Dark Star War, I guess you want to call it, that's upcoming, it's a big ordeal. I mean, it's going to be big, and they're going to need their big guns if they're going to take on this whole Dark Star threat. And Hal Jordan, I mean, love him and hate him, no matter which side you fall on. Everybody knows that when you're distracted, you're not at your best, And Hal Jordan has shown that before in the past, and it was kind of nice to see Hector Hammond kind of help him with carrying the burden of all his transgressions in the past and see through it and help him move forward to face the threat that's coming.
Yeah, I thought it was neat for both characters because it showed an evolution for Hal as well as character growth for Hector Hammond. Oh
yeah, and Hector Hammond's such a fascinating character. On a side note, what did you think about Hector Hammond in the movie when it came out?
It's interesting. In the first draft of that movie script, Hector Hammond was the big bad guy. I think he was written okay. I'm not real sold on the performance of the actor.
Right. I feel the same way.
Yeah. But, in the books, he's done well. I have to give the guy credit for putting in the best effort, though. The other part of this issue that I thought was so very powerful was the throwdown between Arkillo and Guy Gardner. And Guy is forced by Arkillo to face a hard truth that Arkillo is just as guilty of the transgressions as those that he's already put down.
And I'd have to say that if there was going to be any kind of relationship in the year of 2018 that I admire the most, it's Guy Gardner and Arkillo. I love their relationship together. I said it before, I'll say it until the cows come home. I love the way those two act together. I really wish they would do some kind of team up at some point with those two or have Arkillo come over to the Green Lantern side. That would just be really cool.
Yeah, the scene where Arkillo is, he's beat down, he's bloodied, and Guy is right there ready to put the final shot in Arkillo's head. And Arkillo is like, you truly don't want to do this. You're my friend. And you can see Guy Gardner's face well up with some tears. It was such a great, powerful moment. Fernando Passarin really helped sell that scene that Robert Venditti wrote. And it gave us so much more extra layers to it, just in terms of the emotional resonance. It was great. I just loved it.
It was really, really deep. And then having his father there, too. And it was really neat because right after that, you notice how Guy Gardner goes and his father interact how you would anticipate they were going to interact because of how they've had interactions before in the past. Guy Gardner's like, look, I got to go, Dad. I'll talk to you later. Later. Goodbye.
Yeah. And the cat's in the cradle and But it was neat to see Roland as Guy's out of earshot, him saying, I'm proud of you, son. And it was such a nice moment. It sets the stage for hopefully not a conversation over a beer, but a conversation over a cup of coffee between father and son, and to maybe give him some sense of closure.
Well, and have you noticed? I mean, so Arkillo, right? Arkillo has come and gone. I mean, so the Sinestro Corps and the Yellow Lanterns are all but spread out wherever they're spread out. So you see like Sinestro every once in a while. You see Ceramic Natu or whatnot. But a lot of them, for lack of a better words, aren't showing up in any books. Arkillo is pretty much the only other Yellow Lantern that you've seen pop up here and there. And I wonder why they chose him of all characters to keep around in constant continuity.
Yeah, I think it's because Robert Venditti loves the dynamic between the two. He's made comments that he loves to write them together, so it doesn't surprise me too much from that perspective.
That would make sense, and he does it well. I mean, he really does it well. I mean, he really portrays the camaraderie they have for one another, even though they're from obviously different backgrounds. But I mean, he really portrays how they work off one another. It's really cool. I love it.
Yeah. I just thought it was such a great. I don't know. It was such a great scene. It was a great payoff to the relationship they've built over the time, over these years. I mean, the whole thing when Guy Gardner says, "I'm peanut butter, you're chocolate," can't nobody brawl like we do. How great!
Oh gosh.
And we do get an update with Kyle. As you and I both kind of speculated, Orion busts Kyle out of jail and joins him to come back and try to help in this big fight.
Yeah, and it'd be kind of cool to see Kyle kind of move over to maybe a New Gods title. He'd be a good fit over there too.
Yeah. And not much else happens until you get to the very end, and the Mogo gets surrounded by Darkstars, so the big throwdown is a coming.
Oh, that one panel is just cool, and I like how they show him just lining in single formation all the way around the planet.
I liked too the DC Nation page at the end of this has an interview with Venditti in it, and I didn't realize 97 issues. He will have written 97 issues by the time he reaches issue 50.
That's just crazy. I mean, that's just crazy, and he has put so much time and energy into this. It just solidifies it even more that I'm going to miss him when he's gone. We should probably have a eulogy for him written after that.
Yeah, that's agreed. He's I think he started out in a bad position, and admittedly, I did not like Lights Out. Some people did. I really didn't like it, but I think over time and when he hit the New 52 stuff, when that got over with, and he was able to do the Rebirth stuff, and it looked like he had a lot more creative ability without interference from DC editorial. I think the book really shined.
Yep, it did, and then. He's going to shine when he gets more involved with Hawkman. I've read that. The first issue was really good. I'm looking forward to the second one. But he'll do well in that title too. I mean, I hate to say it because it's the Green Lantern Corps and this is Green Lantern titles that he's leaving, but he'll do well with whatever he does. He's an amazing writer. Yeah,
I think he'll benefit from the fact that Hawkman has been sitting kind of on the shelf for a while. That there's no real fan expectation per se.
Right, and it really gives people to understand. I don't know. For me, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, I've always known them from the cartoon. Obviously, I've read a little bit of them here and there when they've shown up in Justice League and when they've had their own titles. But I didn't really know a lot of back history about their characters. When I read his first issue of Hawkman, I actually felt like I learned more about Hawkman at that time in that particular issue than I ever had at all the stuff that I've read before.
I agree. So let's take a quick pause and let's go back and let's do our go back in the Wayback Machine, get our DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour, and we'll go back and do a review of Emerald Dawn #1, or the first Emerald Dawn series, I should say.
All right, sounds great to me.
This is Robert Venditti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
And welcome back to Podcast of OA, episode number 123. So we've been talking for a while now, at least in the last two episodes, I should say. Phil and I have been talking about what do we want to do to add more content to the show, and the listener feedback was loud and clear and echoed some of our own thoughts about doing some retro reviews. So I gave Phil the assignment of pick a story we can talk about as something that was meaningful from the days gone by. And it was funny when you first texted me, you said Emerald Twilight, and I was like, oh geez, I don't know if I can start here. But then you corrected yourself and said no, I meant Emerald Dawn. So we're gonna go back to, let's see, this story debuted in actually, was it December of 1989?
Yeah, long time ago. I was 19 at the time.
Wow. And this was basically a retelling of Hal Jordan's origin, getting ready to launch a new book, because Green Lantern wasn't in a book at the time.
Right. So we got a retelling of his origin, a basic retelling of his origin. Actually, I wouldn't say basic. It actually expounded a little bit more on the origin story from the original one.
Yeah, if you go back to Showcase 22, that was very small, and this is much more. There's much more breadth to the story. Right.
So like you said, it came out in '89. Let me rephrase. I wasn't 19 at the time. I was actually 88. I graduated high school. I would have been a freshman in high school at the time.
Wow.
1980. Right. Way back when. Jeez. So anyway, getting past all that nonsense. Emerald Dawn, issues 1 through 6, which is basically part 1, the contained storyline. And then what I was thinking, we'll do Emerald Dawn 2 the next podcast then.
Yeah, let's do that.
So the first tidbit, the first interesting part that I picked up on was there was a different writer for the first one that there was for the last of them. Did you know that?
Yes, and do you know the story behind it?
I don't. So just to introduce the readers, James Owsley did the first Emerald Dawn #1, and then issues 2 through 6 of Emerald Dawn 1, Gerard Jones and Keith Giffen did the rest of them.
Now, do you know who James Owsley is?
I don't.
James Owsley is now known these days as Christopher Priest.
Really?
Yes. And James Owsley at the time came to DC, and he was given this assignment, and he and the editors, which were Andy Helfer and Kevin Dooley, the infamous Kevin Dooley, basically he had a hard time with him, and it took him months to get the first script approved, and he was so discouraged in the process. At the end of the first issue, he walked off the assignment. He left DC altogether and went off on his own, renamed himself Christopher Priest, and the rest is history.
I didn't know that. I'm so glad you told me that, because I was like, why would they change writers after one issue?
Yep, wow. That's why. And just to, it foreshadows what happens in the Green Lantern book, because Gerard Jones, and we all know Gerard Jones, his recent history is not anything that's spectacular. In fact, it's downright disgusting. But he, at the time when he wrote he went on to after he wrote this, he went on to write the Green Lantern book. He and Kevin Dooley, their relationship soured so badly, that's what led to the change in Emerald Twilight. Gerard Jones had a version of Emerald Twilight, and he walked off the book. He quit before he could be fired, and they trashed his version of Emerald Twilight that had already been solicited, and brought in Ron Mars to do the Emerald Twilight that was published.
Huh. That's really, really cool. I'm glad you told me that, man. That's really, really good information to have. I did not know that. I love this podcast. Okay, so Emerald Dawn #1. Let's go to first few pages. We got some origin stuff going on. Hal Jordan are watching his dad die again, unfortunately, which leads into him being majorly upset. What I thought was interesting about this one, though, is it led him into drinking. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which I felt like was kind of a sad take on Hal Jordan's character. Actually, let me rephrase that. I felt like it was a poor attempt at trying to get to the inner workings of Hal Jordan as a character.
Yeah, at the time, a lot of us felt like they were trying to, air quote, Marvelize Hal Jordan. They were trying to give him some angst above and beyond the death of his father. And in this story, Hal's father is not supportive in any way, shape, or form, and that relationship is not the same as we know it now.
No, you're right. It's really not. It's really kind of shadowed over at the beginning. They really didn't have a lot of interactions between one another. And I've always liked those small interactions between Martin and Hal Jordan, because I feel like they're both one and the same character, just one's an extension of the other.
Right.
Hal Jordan gets into an accident, he's been drinking, gets in the hospital, and then he ends up finding out that his friend was killed. I forgot the guy's name, Andy.
Yep.
And so then he's facing criminal charges again. So this will go into the whole foreshadowing of Hal Jordan and what people kind of may or may not understand about him as a character and why he's such a rogue type of Green Lantern these days. A lot of Hal Jordan is built off of not necessarily following the rules, and when he doesn't follow the rules, he gets himself in trouble, but he always gets out of trouble. That's the benefit of Hal Jordan, I guess, being Hal Jordan.
Well, and one of the things I took offense to was that Hal blames the road sign for the car accident.
I know, right? He's so hell-bent on this road sign the whole time, and it's like, come on, man, have some rationalization here, dude. So then later on in the issue, of course, he comes across the ring, the ship or whatnot. Abin Sur comes along, but we also learn what was really interesting is we're going to learn on who it was actually killed Abin Sur, which was a different take on his origin story from prior, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yeah, prior to that, they really didn't explain why Abin Sur crashed.
Right. So this one we actually get a take on how and why he crashed, and that transitions into number 2 with this whole creature named Legion. Now, I'm not familiar with Legion very much at all, and I don't know if you have any kind of info on him.
Well, Legion was created just for this story, but the interesting thing, we talked a little bit about the Green Lantern movie earlier and how Hector Hammond was the main bad guy. In the original first draft of the script, Legion appeared, and Legion was what killed Abin Sur in the first draft of the Green Lantern movie script. And that's the first thing that Hal deals with and the Green Lanterns deal with is Legion. So it very much takes some of its story beats, the original plot to the Green Lantern movie, takes a lot of story beats from Emerald Dawn.
I wonder why they chose to omit that from the final movie.
I believe what happened was that when Jeff Johns got there and was finally able to provide some advice, he kind of steered them more towards the modern continuity, and that's when some of the things changed. Okay, well that would make sense because not a lot of readers would be familiar with Legion because I know I'm familiar with them. Rereading them, I had to reacclimate myself with them because I haven't seen him in so long. But that's why I asked because I didn't know he was just created just for this arc alone. And he's kind of a non-essential character. I mean, all throughout the whole issues 1 through 6. I mean, he's not even that formidable of a foe. No, he's really just a plot device. Right. That's a better way to put it. Right. So after issue number 1, which was aptly entitled The Sign, because obviously the yellow sign caused all the problems. It was also one of the best covers ever. You talking about the Emerald, their first Emerald Dawn? Oh, yeah, that cover is spectacular. Yeah, I like how he's just floating there. That's really, really cool. All right, so then we go on to number 2, obviously, and this is The Trail. Now, this one came out the following year, January 1990. So now Hal Jordan is wanted by the public. Oddly enough, Hal Jordan, renegade. He was wanted by the Green Lantern Corps. See, the guy can't escape anything. And then, sadly, Hal Jordan's booked on a DUI, which is ultimately probably one of the saddest parts about that particular issue. Yeah, I had a real hard time with the whole DWI thing. I mean, I didn't feel like it did anything for his character. Even when he was sitting in prison and he was talking to that other gentleman in prison or whatnot, I didn't feel like, yes, you have to reflect when you're in prison, obviously, especially when you're getting arrested for something like this. But it didn't even give him much reflection point because, I mean, obviously Legion shows up right away. But even by that stretch, it still didn't give a lot of time for Hal Jordan to recompense for what he had just done. And I'll be honest with you, he didn't seem like he owned up to it that much. No, it was still about excuses, and I agree. The whole point of this was to give him some reason to reflect and grow and show some depth of character, but then they wasted that opportunity. And this is the jump from, James Owsley to Keith Giffen doing the plot and handing it over to Gerard Jones. Now that creative vision has shifted completely. Oh, that's right. I forgot they changed writers, so that could have a lot to do with that discrepancy. That's interesting. Okay, so, and then the readers will go on to issue number 3. Now, issue number 3, and keep in mind, these are really, really short. They feel like they're short reads from what we read these days.
Am I saying that right? It seems like there's more content that we read in the comic books that are coming out now than there was from the really, really early ones back in the 80s and the early 90s for that matter.
Yeah, these did feel like a really fast read.
Yeah, because there wasn't much dialogue that was taking place in those.
That's very true. I think today's books are a little more exposition heavy.
Yeah, they really are, and that's a benefit to readers because it actually gives you more in-depth analysis of everything that's taking place. So issue number 3, we go into the ring. The ring. So Hal returns. The hospital is destroyed, so that's all gone. Ferris aircraft is demolished. For how many times that's happened in the course of
Yeah, that's original, isn't it?
This is where we learn the origin of the crash that took place and subsequently Abin Sur landing on Earth and giving the ring to Hal Jordan, which a good spin. That would have been probably a really, really good take on an origin story rather than, and this goes back to what they brought up about the movie, even though a lot of Green Lantern fans wouldn't have been familiar with Legion or whatnot, it would have been better to understand how Abin Sur got to Earth than it would have been just by saying he crash landed because he came into contact with something. Now, the movie version showed him coming into contact with Parallax, if I'm not mistaken. Wasn't that at the very beginning?
Yep, and it was a case of that Abin Sur, what preceded it was Arisha Rob's father was killed, and there's a planet that needs to be evacuated, and so Abin Sur has the ship because he needs some place to put all the people. So he's flying there to rescue the people on the planet.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so then we got Hal Jordan, fighting it out with Legion or whatnot, and they go back and forth. But again, Legion is kind of a wimp. I mean, he's like you said, plot device. He's pretty much there as a punching bag for each other.
Yeah, they tried to make a big deal over the fact he was yellow, but it really didn't. It didn't come off looking the way that it should have. No,
it really didn't. I also another tidbit about this issue is it, and I don't know if this is explained in any other the Green Lantern comics. It talks about his recharge rate for his ring. And how the battery states that every 24 hours he has to recharge. I don't think that's I don't know if that's been explained a lot before this issue. Do you know?
Yeah, not a whole lot. I mean, they kind of talked about a 24-hour charge, and that was a big thing for quite a while. But they didn't really do a lot of explanation as to why it was that way.
Okay, yeah, because I kind of noticed that they haven't really talked about it much at all recently. Matter of fact, they don't show the lanterns all that much to begin with anymore. If you notice that, he usually kept his in his locker at work or whatnot, but they don't really show that a lot like they used to.
No, like in the old days, you used to see him charge his ring almost every comic, it seemed.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool thing, but now not so much. Okay, so everything's destroyed. Legion's back, so we go into issue number 4. Which subsequently was a little bit better of an issue for me. Not much better, but it was somewhat better. And this one's aptly titled The Corps. And this is where Hal learns more about the Green Lantern Corps and more about the Guardian's role in the whole overall case, right?
Right.
Because he takes his trip to Oa, and then he comes across the book. Now I would assume this is the same book that they still reference in today's continuity, right?
Right, yep, the Book of Oa. Mm-hmm.
Book of Oa, right. And then they talk about these people called, I think it's the Tekai.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that one.
I don't think anybody knows how to pronounce half of these. And then, of course, Legion follows them to Oa. I will say I miss Oa being around. I wish they'd find a way to introduce that back into continuity.
I do too, because changing the name of the show to Podcast of Mogo does not have the same ring to it.
I guess it wouldn't. And then we see the super cool, I don't know if readers are following along, but on page, I'm not sure what page this is, page 6, we see the super cool lawnmower that Hal Jordan makes when he's when he's learning from Tomar Lee.
Yeah, that was a great image.
Some of the stuff that they do, some of the artwork back then, it's really, really good. But I have to remember, this artwork's for the time. I mean, and artwork has changed considerably since the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah, that's the one thing about going back and looking at old books is you realize how far the art has changed, how much better it is now.
And some of it is really cringeworthy, If you look back on some of these old issues, there's just some really, really cringeworthy artists. And it kind of makes you think, okay, were they popular or were they not popular? Because the art is really not that great.
I think if you compare it to other books of the era, it's on par, if not maybe a little better. But it was all pretty horrific in a lot of places.
You're right. Okay, so not much takes place. They have their battle. A legion arrives, and then we go on to issue 5, which is the test. And this is the big throwdown between the Green Lantern Corps and Legion, which of course they handle with, it looks like, no problems whatsoever. Now, it's really interesting that you see Sinestro one time in this first arc. You see him on page 4?
Yeah. It was interesting that they really kind of downplayed his importance in introducing him.
They really didn't do much to him, did they?
No.
I mean, I don't even think he had a line of dialogue, to be honest with you. He was just kind of a shadow figure in the background. Kilowog gained a lot of attention, which was cool, because everybody's a big Kilowog fan. And I thought it was really, really neat how he was a prominent role in this. For that matter, the Green Lantern Corps that showed up, there wasn't a lot of them, but the ones that showed up I thought they were characterized really, really, really well. And I thought the ones that they did introduce, like Solak and Tomar-Re, and I'm not sure what else you can find on there. There's, I don't think that's Aricia. No, that wouldn't be Aricia.
No, it was too early for her.
It was way too early for her. I'm not sure who some of these other characters are. But the ones that they did utilize at this time frame is really kind of cool. I actually want to try to figure out what their names are and see if they're still around in today's continuity.
Yeah, I've always loved doing that kind of stuff to see if characters are still around. It's difficult in some cases because lots of times artists would create a character just because it looked cool with no intention of the character having a name or any of those kind of things at all. And one of the things I really liked about Ethan Van Sciver was that he tried to create characters that he would reuse. And if you go way back to in the beginning of the Jeff Johns run, they kind of showed you a whole bunch of the characters and gave you mini biographies of all of them.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that would have been the 90s run, right? Jeff Johns did that in the 90s?
Well, no, in Jeff Johns' Rebirth run.
Jeff Johns' Rebirth, right.
Yeah, in his Rebirth run. After that, there was an issue, I think it was like a Secret Origin book, and it kind of gave you snapshots of all the different corps that had been introduced so far, and little mini bios, what sector were they from, and so on, of a lot of the characters, both Green Lanterns and Yellow Lanterns.
Okay, so let's see. And towards the end of this issue, we see kind of the tensions between the Guardians and Hal Jordan once again. And I don't think there's ever been a time where there hasn't been tension between those two factions.
That's very true. That's very true.
And I don't think there's a time that Hal Jordan has ever actually listened to anything the Guardians have ever had to say.
Right, except they tried to make it look like Hal was marching to the beat of the Guardians unquestionably during the Denny O'Neil era, where they wanted to paint Hal as a bootlicker, essentially. But yeah, it was never that way. He always was at odds. His moral compass would make him question the Guardians. And the Guardians were never portrayed as evil. They were kind of portrayed more as, they had the whole universe's well-being in mind, but they were so emotionally disconnected from the day-to-day life of people that they seem so disconnected emotionally.
That's a really good way to look at it. You're right. That's a good point. Okay, so they battle it out. They beat Legion. Of course, they cover him. They cover him in this mud, so you don't see the yellow anymore, so to speak. And then he's defeated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he's gone. And then he's defeated. And then, of course, we go into, I don't know, like I said, there's not much to gain out of these older issues, folks. So it's like some of this stuff is kind of like, it's background information, but it's spotty background information. You know what I mean?
Right. And it ends up with Hal, he's going to go back to Earth and finish out his time because when Legion busts into the jail, he busts Hal out of jail, essentially.
Right. And then the last issue number 6, which is called The Dawn, Legion's still taking on the Green Lantern Corps, and then, of course, the Guardians come into play. and they have to recompense for the wrongs that they've done and rebuild the planets, rebuild everything. And then the interesting part was Hal merging with the Lantern, which he's done that. I don't know if he's done that before this issue, but obviously that kind of foreshadows him merging with the Lantern in current continuity.
Yes. Yep. And it wasn't used a whole lot back then, that kind of thing. So it was kind of unique and different at the time.
Right, which nowadays is kind of like, I wonder why they didn't do that sooner. Well, when we look at this issue, they did. They did it back in 1990, and we didn't even know it.
Exactly.
So, as far as a starting out point for people, it wouldn't be a bad idea to pick up Emerald Dawn, even 1 and 2 for that matter, to get some early background on Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps and the Guardians for that matter.
Yeah, I think the important distinction is to realize as you're reading it that a lot of the things that take place here don't stick in the longevity of the character, but it does give you a much more fleshed out version of Hal as a character and the story of how he gets the ring than what Showcase 22 provided. And this was really the first major retelling of that origin. And then, of course, Jeff John comes along with Secret Origins later on. And of the two stories, I think Secret Origins is the stronger story.
I would agree.
By quite a bit. I think what Jeff Johns does is he builds up the more hero worship relationship between Hal and his father, and the stress in the family is between Hal and his mother and his brothers, and how they all respond to the death of Martin Jordan.
Right. And then this one just kind of plays over that, and it goes into more or less the infallibility of Hal Jordan himself. The drinking thing and him not being able to own up and be accountable for his actions or whatnot, which, ironically enough, Hal Jordan still does that to these days.
To a point, yeah. And I think what they tried to do in part 2 is I think they realized that they didn't show Hal taking responsibility good enough. I think that was part of the underlying reason why they did Emerald Dawn 2, because that really starts out with Hal serving his 90 days of prison time and owning up to it.
Very good point. Very, very good point. So as far as the retro reads go, I mean, I don't know. I liked rereading it again. I haven't read it in a long time, and that was one of the first ones I thought of when you gave me the assignment. I was like, well, I should go back, because that was at a time, for me, that was at a time when I was just getting into high school. I was just getting back into my comic books again, and back in the early 1990s, I mean, back when I was in high school, nerdom wasn't the cool status as it is now. So if you read comic books when I was in high school, you were an outcast. People didn't want to know that. You couldn't get a date. No girl would touch you with a 10-foot pole if you read comic books.
Right. We were geek before geek was cool.
Right. So rereading it now, because I probably haven't read it since that time frame, it really lacked in a lot of punch. But I think it's because I've read so much following and so much bigger stuff following that my anticipation level is a lot higher and my expectations are higher for what they should be doing with their books nowadays. And when you go back and read some of these retro issues, a lot of the things that we're doing in comic books in today's modern times weren't really the focus of attention back when these comic books were first being published in the 80s and the 90s or whatnot.
Right. I think it's important to have context in mind when you go back and read some of these issues. This was a time frame when the Green Lantern book had been canceled. Hal Jordan showed up in the Action Comic Weekly book for a while with some stories, and they really didn't know what they were doing with the property, and they thought, well, we're going to do a relaunch. We need a way to stir up some enthusiasm, and that was why this fleshed out origin was brought out, was to kind of reintroduce the character to a modern audience. And it served its purpose back then. I remember reading it. I was just excited to have a regular book with Hal in it at the time in a 6-issue miniseries. It was like they were finally giving him some attention that he hadn't gotten in quite some time. As spotty as I felt some of the parts of the story were, I think, going back to then, at that time I was 24, 25 years old, so I was still not much older than you, but my reference in looking at him, he almost felt like a peer because he was almost in the same age group as me, which was a little weird to think about. But it made him feel more human because of the alcoholic incidents of having the car crash. But at the same time, I was like, but that doesn't sound like the Hal I know. So I was really torn about it at the time.
Absolutely. I do like the font they used for the Green Lantern. I like how they got the flames on top of most of the letters.
Yeah, that was a nice throwback to the original logo they used way back in the day. And then right down to the Hal Jordan on the cover that's running with the ring hand up. That's all very much a flashback to classic Green Lantern books.
Yeah, I like that. It'd be cool if they brought that back with these new issues, but we can't have it all, I guess.
Nope, I agree. So I hope our listeners enjoyed this kind of a jump back time capsule review, and we'll in the next episode talk about Green Lantern Emerald Dawn 2. I think that'll be exciting, and then I've got a couple of ideas for what to do after that. So,
okay.
Phil, we've got one email we need to read, so let's take a quick pause and wet our whistle a little bit, and then we'll come back and talk about some feedback we got.
Terrific.
My name is John Mayo.
And I'm Bob Retall.
What is the Weekly Comics Spotlight?
Comics reviews from two fans with 65 years of combined comics reading experience,
who each get and read well over 100 different comics each month from Marvel, DC, and a wide variety of independent publishers.
Reviews that highlight books that may not hit everyone's radar screen since most people don't buy so many different comics each month.
Reviews with honest opinions. We enjoy comics but realize not every issue that we read is a solid gold masterpiece. All in about 30 minutes. So please check out the Weekly Comics Spotlight at www.comicbookpage.com/podcast.
Well, Phil, we're 2 episodes into your run on the podcast of OA, and after 2 episodes, you've got some fan mail. So I want to read to you an email we got on our website. It was a comment left on the blog of OA from Daniel, and he says, I just wanted to drop a line and welcome Mr. Bova. You're a welcome addition, and your knowledge and enthusiasm is already bringing new life and energy to the podcast. Also, I just recently picked up the complete run of the original Darkstars, and I don't think that Horatio or Slack were even members, although I might be mistaken. I've only flipped through most of the run. I think Horatio was hanging out with Guy in his book and was, air quote, killed by Major Force around that time, and I think Chip was killed before the Darkstars in Green Lantern Mosaic. Also, it might be cool to review Green Lantern Volume 3, Issue 75, as it was the final destruction of the Darkstars at the hands of Darkseid's son, Graven. It's also where John Stewart is first paralyzed. But thanks for the great material, and I'm looking forward to the new podcast and the new segment.
Very cool, very nice. Well, Daniel, I appreciate the comments, number one. Number two, it's cool that you're going back and going through the Darkstars issues, because I was going to do the same thing. I just uploaded all the digital ones to my iPad, and I was going to make my way through those. As far as the questions go with Aricia and Salak, you're probably going to have to chime in, Myron, because you might know more about that than I do, because I haven't tapped into this in a long time.
I did go back and do some research after our last episode because I couldn't remember, and Daniel's exactly right. Aricia was not a member, and neither was Salak. Some of the members that did join the Darkstars that were Green Lanterns was Tomar 2, Zax, who, I don't know, Phil, if you remember Zax, but he was like a cricket-looking guy.
Yeah, I remember him.
Gallius Zed was a Darkstar. Medphil was a Darkstar, as well as Gnort.
Oh, Gnort was. That's really interesting.
Yep.
And Medphil. I like Medphil. I like that character too.
And so was Charlie Vicker. Do you remember Charlie Vicker at all?
Vaguely. I vaguely remember him.
Charlie Vickers looks a lot like Hal Jordan, and he was actually an actor who played Green Lantern in a DC Universe version of a Green Lantern TV show. Kind of a neat story. Donna Troy was a Darkstar too.
I remember Donna Troy being a Darkstar. I don't think she was. Was she at this time? Did she go back this far?
Yeah, she was the same time as John Stewart.
Okay. So like I said, I haven't read through all of them yet. I think I got through maybe 1 or 2 issues, and I like how Alyssa Drax is in this one too. She shows up in these.
And a moment ago, I mentioned Tomar 2. Tomar 2 is in the new iteration. He wasn't one of the original Darkstars. I want to correct myself before somebody says, no, you're wrong. Tomar 2, he's in it now. He wasn't back then. Tomar 2 didn't even exist back then.
So this, the Darkstars series would have segged in, that would have been around the time of Kyle Rayner, right?
Darkstars #1 started in 1992, and it ended in 1996. So it overlapped the beginning of Kyle Rayner's run in 94.
Okay, gotcha.
And I think what ended up happening was because DC wanted to establish Kyle as the only one. That was when Alan Scott was renamed Sentinel, and they wanted John Stewart to continue, so they made him a Dark Star and took some of the Green Lantern cast to try to prop up this new franchise, because I think originally the Dark Stars they thought would maybe take the place of the Green Lantern Corps, at least for as long as Kyle Rayner lasted as the sole Green Lantern, and then they decided to take John Stewart out of it altogether and end up crippling him in an accident. Well, I shouldn't say crippled. He was crippled in battle.
Which, thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up, because I was actually curious of where he actually was paralyzed to begin with. But I'm glad you caught that on to me. And actually, I'm going to go back and read that issue that he brought up too, that Volume 3, issue 75. That was really, really cool. Yep,
and Aricia was killed by Major Force. She showed up, and Guy Gardner had his own book for a while where he had the Sinestro ring, not the he used it for good, not evil. It wasn't like it was a Sinestro Corps ring, but it was Sinestro's ring that he had when he was a villain. But he used it for good things, and then they went off and because, again, they didn't want to have another ring welder, that's when they came up with the whole idea of the Voldarian powers and Guy Gardner Warrior, and Aricia showed up over there. I think she was a supermodel for a while, and then she ends up getting killed by Major Force. But then we find out that she really didn't die, because in the relaunched version of Green Lantern under Jeff Johns, Aricia was captured by the Manhunters.
But she did also die at one point, because she was brought back to life by Cyborg Superman in the Sinestro Corps War, right?
I don't recall that part. I just remember the whole thing of the Lost Lanterns and Hal finding her when he went off to deal with the Manhunters. I don't remember anything during Sinestro Corps War. Could have been, though.
I could have swore there was a scene, because Cyborg Superman's one of my favorite villains. And I could have swore there was a time, and I think it was when Cyborg Superman had remember when he had the Sinestro emblem on his chest? And I think there was a time when he was holding Aricia in his hand or something like that. And it was just a one-page spread, and it showed them both standing there. And he was holding her by the back of the neck or something like that, and he was bringing her back to life, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe a reader will chime in or send you an email or whatnot to elaborate on that. But anyway, I can go back and reread some of the Sinestro Corps War, because it's a phenomenal issue anyway. But I could have swore that took place, but like I said, I could be wrong.
Well, I can tell you, I'm on Wikipedia right now, and okay. Cyborg Superman revealed that after Aricia was murdered by Major Force, her species' natural healing ability revived her underground, and Cyborg Superman sent his Manhunters to bring her to Bayat. So I wonder if that's where you're getting that memory of that scene.
That could be where it was. That could be where that was. It was a great scene. I just remember I was such a big fan of Cyborg Superman during that run. I just thought he was really, really cool, and how they used him in that particular role.
Yeah, he was a good character, and I think we're going to see him again under Dan Jurgens' pen, because Dan Jurgens, as we all know, was one of the architects of the Death of Superman and the creation of Cyborg Superman.
Right, and I think he helped create the Eradicator too, didn't he?
Yep, and if I remember correctly, I think we're going to see Cyborg Superman show up in Green Lanterns.
I hope so. I really liked him when he was in there to begin with. I thought he was a cool part of their continuity.
Yeah, I agree. I look forward to seeing him again. I always thought that he was such a tragic character, because he really wanted to die in the end and couldn't.
Well, see, and it's funny you mention that, because there was one panel in particular I remember when, I don't know if he was fighting, and I don't know who he was fighting, but I remember he got blown to pieces, and they showed on one panel, they showed like a little fragment of his face that was floating through space. And it was just his eye or something like that, and part of his cheekbone or something. And I remember him saying thank you to whoever did that, because he was finally got defeated, and he finally got, they got rid of him or whatnot. He finally got a chance to die. But of course, Cyborg Superman cannot die. I mean, forever he's technology, so his technology would adhere to anything that was around him. You know what I mean? So I like how they've taken him from the 90s as like a tier character, and actually made him part of a bigger whole.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a very powerful character, and of course he's gotten a new life, being on. Hank Henshaw, I should say, got a kind of a new life on the Supergirl TV show.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I wonder if he's going to show up in this, because Supergirl 22, she does something with Oa, or not Oa, Mogo.
Yeah,
she does something with the Green Lantern Corps.
Yeah, that's a good reminder too. Folks should keep an eye out for the Supergirl book because the Green Lanterns are going to appear over in that book.
And I wonder what that story arc is going to consist of. And I actually wonder who they're going to throw over there in that title.
Yeah, agreed. So
Celeste, I don't think, mentioned anything.
Yeah, no, agreed. So Phil, we normally take a break and come back and close out the show, but what do you say we just go ahead, since we've been talking for a while? Why don't we go ahead and wrap things up without taking a break and make listeners listen through a sound bite or something? Let's go ahead and wrap up an episode, which I think this has been a great episode for us.
Yeah, it really has, and I really like the fact that we're going to start doing some of these retro reviews or whatnot. I'm kind of it helps me go back and reread some of the stuff because it's been a while since I've tapped into that kind of information. So it kind of helps me gather more evidence on what we're reading now by going back and reading the prior stuff, because there's breadcrumbs back there. And like you had mentioned before many times with Venditti, bringing back a lot of prominent characters and bringing back a lot of the old school Green Lantern mythos. The Darkstars was part of it, and you would have to know more about the Darkstars by going back to reread, like Daniel's doing, to know how the Darkstars operate now.
Right, and while Venditti's changed some things here and there, the core essence of that story and those characters and those power sets are still there.
Right, and just so everybody knows, when we do Emerald Dawn #2. For all the Sinestro fans out there, he will be included in the next podcast.
Absolutely. Well,
so yeah, it was a great episode, Myron. We talked for a little bit longer than we usually do, but it goes by so fast.
It does. And I think having an extra segment does add to that, but I think it's a good thing. I think it's all good content.
Absolutely.
I hope listeners agree. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 124. As always, we thank you for listening and thank you for joining us in our Green Lantern conversation. And, until next time, as I always like to say, keep your rings charged, be good to each other, and make every day your brightest day. And, Phil, you got any parting words?
Keeping it green in 2018. Everybody take it easy, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Take care, everybody. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.